Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we are excited to find out what it takes to become a passionate and effective advocate for your community. Thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's edition of The City Imagines, hosted by the Word on the Street Toronto. Tonight, our episode is called Speaking Out, and we are going to be welcoming three dedicated boundary breakers, I would say, to our program, to our virtual studio. We have Celina, Caesar-Chavannes, Cheri DiNovo, and Supriya Dwivedi. I'm Rebecca Diem. I'm WOTS Toronto's new digital strategy and communications manager. And I'm coming to you live from the city's West End, the Parkdale neighborhood. We are very, sorry, I went off script. Tonight is the fourth episode of our second season of The City Imagines. This is a series where we are very excited to talk to authors, community leaders, and other really interesting people about books that shape our city. Next month in June, we have Taya Mutanji, Natasha Ramotar, and Adrian De Leon talking about their new Scarborough anthology called Feel Ways. And in June, we're highlighting another anthology. Artist and musician Brian Wright McLeod will be in conversation with contributors to Indigenous Toronto, stories that carry this place. Now, before I invite Supriya onto the broadcast, I would like to make a couple of announcements about some of the other things we have going on at the Word on the Street Toronto. And I would also like to acknowledge that WOTS Toronto operates on Treaty 13 territory. We are, gotta get the list up here. We would like to recognize that we operate on the territory of the Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, and that this territory is also the subject of the Wampum Belt Dish with One Spoon Belt Covenant, an agreement to care for and share the resources around the Great Lakes in peace. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, and Inuit and Métis people with long histories on this land. We are privileged to live, work, and create in this territory and strive to act with awareness and solidarity. We encourage you to educate yourself about the land you occupy wherever you're tuning in from. All right, so a few more announcements that we have. First, on the topic of books and commerce, the Word on the Street is launching a new WOTS Weekly Features newsletter in April, on Monday actually, where we are sharing weekly deals from local businesses and bringing you live mini conversations with exhibitors and authors. We'll be posting the link to sign up in the comments section, so make sure you check that out. And you can also find all of the exhibitors on our website each week. This week's theme is Hamilton Appreciation. We have some really great exhibitors out there, and this is kind of like our way of bringing our marketplace from the festival weekend into an all-year experience, so we can give them each of our exhibitors like the attention and love and appreciation they deserve, and so that you can get a curated selection, a hand-picked selection by our very own event coordinator, Sienna Tristan, to your inbox every week. We also, oh, no, that's it. All right. So luckily you guys are stuck with me as the host, but I will be passing things on shortly to our moderator for the evening, Supriya Dwivedi, who I watched frequently, almost every week on CBC's Power and Politics, and loved all of her insights and opinions. And so I'm very excited to be watching behind the scenes tonight. If you want to be the first to know about new videos from the Word on the Street, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll get many hilarious insights from our staff if you tune into our What's on This Month videos. We have the City Imagines videos, our monthly Book of the Month interviews with featured authors, and of course, the City Imagines. Okay, without further ado, please welcome Supriya Dwivedi. Supriya is a former talk radio host and campaign advisor, currently working as Senior Counsel for Enterprise Canada, a national strategic communications firm. In addition to appearing weekly on CBC's Power and Politics, Supriya's political insights are regularly sought out by a myriad of outlets, both national and international, and by me on Twitter, because I think you are really cool. So welcome, Supriya.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I mean, I was going to add my grandmother, who always wants to know what I'm thinking about politics, but it's good to know you, Rebecca, as well, are always out there.
That's like, that should go in your Twitter bio, I think, because, like, you know, when your grandmother seeks out your political opinions, like that's like the height of it for me.
I know, that's up here, right? Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's now welcome our first, I guess, guest or panelist. Celina Caesar-Chavannes is an equity and inclusion advocate and a leadership consultant as well. She is a former member of Parliament who served as parliamentary secretary to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and to the Minister of International Development et la Francophonie. Before entering politics, Celina was a successful entrepreneur, launching and growing an award-winning research management and consulting firm. And we also have Cheri DiNovo. Cheri is a former Ontario MPP, and folks may not realize this, but Cheri actually passed into law more pro-LGBTQ legislation than anyone in the entire history of Canada. Cheri is also a minister at Trinity St. Paul's here in Toronto, and she is a member of the Order of Canada, recognized for her contributions to provincial politics and her lifelong advocacy of social justice. Ladies, I am so glad to have both of you here. You know, we were kind of joking a little bit backstage in the digital green room that we wish we could have, you know, done this in normal times where we wouldn't all be separated like this virtually. But you know, I think it's a good second place here to be. And I wanted to just kind of kick off this conversation, I guess, by getting a sense of how you two sort of came to be, you know, these two passionate proponents of doing the right thing, you know, speaking out when you see injustice and channeling that energy into positive change. So I was just wondering, was this something that like both of you also did as kids or growing up? Because I guess I'm just really trying to ask a polite way of, or a polite version of, why are you like this? Like, how did this happen? Celina, let's start with you.
Sorry, I have a dog barking in the background.
No, that's fair. I have a toddler screaming in the background, so
You're good. On mute. That's like the phrase of 2020, 2021. I want to start by saying thank you to Supriya and thank you to Word on the Street for having me here this evening. I want to also acknowledge that I'm speaking to everyone from my home in Whitby, which is Williams Treaty Territory, Mississaugas of the traditional territory of Mississaugas of Scugog Island. And it is really important for me to acknowledge that in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters who continue to fight against oppression and racism. And I also want to acknowledge our ancestors who across Turtle Island have been fighting this since the beginning of time. And to my ancestors across Turtle Island, as well as those that are at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. So when it comes to this question, why are you like this?
Yeah.
I think my mother would say, so I thought about this question. I thought about what would my mother answer? And she would say, because she's always been like this. I've always been this person who looks to champion the underdog, but does it in a way that's unapologetic, that swears, that's not afraid to get down and dirty, and is, you know, unafraid and unapologetic about my advocacy. And I would say that, you know, that while my mother may say that, I would say that my advocacy and why I'm like this is entrenched, and it is the foundation of which my principles are anchored by a lot of the pains and the hurts that I've had throughout my life. And I call politics the most painfully beautiful experience that I've had, because it actually crystallized for me how those painful moments could actually be so powerful in the advocacy that you bring forward, in the willingness to say, I don't want anybody else to feel that pain that I went through, so I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. So between me always being like this and my pain and my hurts, not wanting others to feel it, I'd say I'm this way. I've been this way all my life.
Cheri, for yourself?
Sure. Well, first of all, Supriya, it's always a joy to be hanging out with you, and of course, Celina as well. And thank you, Word on the Street, for hosting us all. I was thinking about this, and I've always kind of been a badass kid. I don't think I ever aged out of that. So I remember very early on growing up in this atheist social justice household. My dad was an ardent NDPer, prior to that, a CCFer. And he took me to demonstrate against George Wallace, if you can imagine that, the racist governor of Alabama. So I remember as a little kid doing that. I also remember as a little kid stuffing conservative pamphlets down a fire chute in a building that my dad said, this is what you do with conservative pamphlets, which even at the time, I thought there was something weird about that, but I did it because you're a kid. I left home at 15. I was in a very violent, dysfunctional household. That's how I grew up. And so the streets were safer. And that's the story of many queer street kids. And I was no different. So I think living and sort of being self-sustaining from a kid age, 15, that gives you something, right? Like you have to learn how to survive. And so I understood. And I also never lost the viewpoint of what it's like to be on the wrong side of the police, to be on the wrong side of the law, to have addiction issues and PTSD, although we didn't call it back then. So I do know that, and that forms you, right? So once you've been there, you can't pretend you weren't. And those are your people, and they're still my peeps, right? Still. So I mean, I think that's where social justice grows and comes from. It comes from your own sense of injustice, right? And a real kind of core understanding of how that shapes lives.
Yeah, and it's like this, it's like something in you that you feel like that you have to be able, both of you just describing it, it's like, I don't want to say it's necessarily inherent or you're born with it, but in both of your cases, it certainly seems like, it's something that has been with you, since you were kids, and that's just so fascinating. The other thing that I think is really interesting, particularly with both of you, is that you've both been on the two sides of that change maker coin, right? You've both been activists, and you've both been politicians, and that too in partisan politics as well. And arguably, I would certainly qualify both of you as still activists. I'm not sure if you guys would. I think you two would both. Yeah, you're both nodding. Okay, so both of you still, you still consider yourself activists, and ended up going into politics, largely because of your activism. And neither of you are actively involved in politics anymore. But something that I hear a lot from, dedicated activists that are doing the work on the ground frequently is that politics cannot and is in fact not really designed or not really set up to bring about real change. So Cheri, let me start with you on this one. But do you think real positive change can flow from partisan politics?
Well, first of all, I'm a diehard socialist, so I think that there is a limitation to what parliamentary politics can achieve. But having said that, I think it's profoundly important. I still see myself as involved in partisan politics, but here's how. I support individuals who I see, they all happen to be women, but who I see as being strong and principled over partisans, and who actually accomplish great things, and also who are on the left of the political spectrum, who don't shy away from the word socialist. So I support radicals. I support them who are elected rather than supporting a party per se, because I think it's those people that really form and change what parliament looks like, either provincial or federal. And I think that's critically important. So social justice action, absolutely. Principles above partisanship.
You know what? I totally agree with Cheri, but I would say from my perspective, when we talked about real change,
Yeah.
it was more of a rhetoric, you know,
You mean hashtag real change.
hashtag real change, hashtag add women change politics, hashtag diversity is our strength. Like, we cannot boil ourselves down to hashtags, because it has been proven, at least in my case, that that hashtag actually boils down to just rhetoric. If you are actually not going to act and do the work that is required to do real change, which requires you to be bold, transformative, government done differently, which is the party that I thought that I was a part of, because that was also part of the rhetoric that they were going to do things differently. They had a majority government and still did what was politically expedient, as opposed to what was necessary to bring about that real change. So, you know, the last election of first past the post, repealing mandatory minimums, expunging criminal records for cannabis, that is real change, and what our party campaigned on. Unfortunately, that is not actually what they did. And I think that boils down to the capacity for people to actually lead in a substantive way rather than a performative way.
So let me just follow up really quickly with you on that. But would it be accurate to say that positive change can in fact flow from partisan politics, but your experience didn't necessarily reflect that, and that's largely because of leadership?
For sure. I think if you have the leadership, like Cheri said, the leadership that is radical, that is looking for what is going to bring impact to people in a substantive way, that is rooted in empathy, that is rooted in actually caring for individuals that they serve, as opposed to a self-serving agenda, that could actually work. And I don't believe that the system is actually broken. I think that there are times when we look at our leadership and the capacity for them to do maybe what is not going to be the most popular thing, but what they know, and in my case, what they campaigned on, to do what is actually right for the people, to do good by the people.
I'm really glad you brought up the system, because it's, you know, another thing that it tends to, at these, you know, in the before times, at these cocktail parties, when you're talking to folks, is that, and this tends to come quite a bit from, you know, political journalists that cover politics, that are steeped in it every day, or partisan lifers like strategists and, you know, the volunteers, the people that do the door knocking and stuff, is that if you're an outspoken MP, particularly if you're a backbench MP, and, you know, added bonus if you're a rookie MP at that, is that, you know, the MPs that are outspoken, they just don't get it. Like, they just don't get the system. They you know, that they're speaking up, but, you know, they're just not cut out for our political system, and they simply don't understand how politics work. And so, I mean, what's your response to that sort of thinking? Because I certainly think that there are other folks that hear that sort of thing, that are, you know, certainly younger than I am, that are looking to perhaps go into politics or are interested, and then they hear that kind of thing and they just get turned off. So, I mean, Cheri, do you think that you can be an outspoken, you know, MP or an outspoken politician while understanding that, yeah, this is the system?
Absolutely. I mean, and to me, it's about saving lives. It's that cut and dried. It's that important. I mean, so when it was my bill banning conversion therapy in Ontario, and we were the first in North America to do that. And, you know, I was sitting in the opposition, and I was not in the leadership of the opposition by any means. And we got that done, and that bill got through. Trans rights, the first again in North America. These bills save lives. They save children's lives. There's no question about it. Parent equality, another one. PTSD is a workplace injury for frontline workers, for first responders. I mean, they took me a long time to get done. I worked with government to get them done. But I'm not the only one who can do this, but I think, you know, we proved that even in opposition, even with low numbers in your caucus, by being outspoken, by working with activists, which is critical, you can actually save lives. You can get legislation passed that will change the nature of how we do business in this country. And we have, you know, time and time again shown examples of that. I mean, I just got very lucky, as you said, Supriya, when you introduced me passing more queer bills than anybody in Canadian history, but also passing more private members' bills in Ontario. And one of the ways we did that is by having all three parties sign on to some of those bills. That took a lot of negotiation. It took some work, but it's possible. So, I mean, I would say to young activists, to old activists, to any activist who thinks about running for government, absolutely go for it, because you can do things, you can make change, you can in the end save lives, and I think that's true. So I'm not at all cynical about it. I'm certainly with Celina. I'm cynical about this, we got to win, and that's really what we're only about. I'm cynical about that, and that's the worst aspect of partisanship, but it's not the only aspect of being in government.
Celina, I gotta imagine people said that to you, at a certain point while you were still in politics as an outspoken MP who, you're just doing your thing, standing up for what you believe in, and yet you have all these, lifelong staffers or whomever, strategists, like the inside political circle jerk, I guess, if I would probably call them that, to rain down on you. Like, what's your response to that kind of thinking?
So my response to that is, people have said, oh, she doesn't get it. Government doesn't move fast. It's a blood sport. Supriya, and those are Armani suits. Let's be clear about putting blood on those suits. It's cutthroat. Possibly if you're shaving your beard, you might cut your throat, but that's as close as it's going to get. We saw during the pandemic that government can move quickly. When it requires us to talk about things that we're perhaps feeling uncomfortable about, racial equity, racism, sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, talking about things that actually require us to stand up and show our mettle in those moments, we tend to be like, well, especially when it comes to racial equality, especially when it comes to Black folks, well, maybe not right now. So at this moment, when we're talking about people running, those who are outspoken, those who are obviously going to be rookie, backbench, show up as your 100% authentic self. We need individuals like that. And I say that knowing full well that I left. And I left because I really needed to figure things out. I wrote my book, because I really wanted people to know that I was figuring things out in the moment, and I needed to figure things out now. But there are so many challenges. Cheri listed a few of them that she was dealing with at her time. We still have issues when we talk about pay equity, when we talk about access to childcare, when we talk about paid 6 days. We have people dying from a global pandemic that is killing racialized women at exceptional rates. If we are not willing to stand up and be our authentic selves and be outspoken for that, and we see doctors doing it right now, going sort of against the grain and speaking out about this at the expense of some of their careers.
Yeah.
So we need to be very clear about what outspokenness does. Outspokenness, as Cheri says, rightfully so, saves lives. But it's not just about what's the immediate. I'm going to keep going back to mandatory minimums. We have Black and Indigenous people rotting in federal prisons, not because they're bad or worse than anybody else. But if you looked at the Globe and Mail report, Bias Behind Bars, you would see that it is racism that exists within the system that causes it to be so. You need people to be outspoken to create that equity, because our political elite don't operate from the blind. What did the Prime Minister say? He operates from the blind spot in which he exists. The rest of us in this country don't have that privilege to do that.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you mentioned the political elite there. I was, with respect to how some of these issues get covered in the media, just generally, by political media, mainstream legacy. I was just wondering if like, what's your view on that? Because it's almost like they're telling younger folks, activists, that it's like the system's already stacked against you, and it's almost like actively discouraging people that would want to go in and make change from doing the right thing and putting their name forward.
So bless social media.
Yeah.
There is another outlet, because the media stacked it against me. Talk about 2018 when I'm talking about racism, and media and others are saying that, how dare Celina talk about this? How dare Celina tell a white member of parliament who ran for leadership, who held the pen on legislation that would impact 37 million people, to check his privilege and be quiet? How dare she do that? When he's talking about investments in Black communities.
We're talking about Maxim, right?
But yes, so when media attacks and says that, everybody else is like, ooh, well, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to be a Celina. But then Celina continues to do so on social media. She continues to push that. And I think that's where there's going to be this challenge, where we're not held to a particular venue by which we could put out our messages, because the message is the medium, right? So we could put out our own stories. And I think that's what you're seeing a lot of right now, people putting out their own stories, their own frustrations, their own anger, and we have to keep speaking up about it. We have to. We had another Black man killed in the United States this week. And we don't have to always look there and say, well, at least we're not the US. We have our DeFonte Millers. We have our Regis Korchinski-Briquettes right here, that we need to say, when are we going to take a leadership on these issues, and not continue to say that, that we're not as bad as the United States. We need to have leadership, and I don't want to sort of diss the media, but we need to ask the challenging, probing questions that are going to hold people accountable when they say systemic racism doesn't exist. We need to hold people accountable when they say, well, I just made a mistake with blackface. We need to hold people accountable when they say that, things are just the way they are and we're not as bad. We need to hold them to account.
Cheri, what's your view on social media kind of equalizing the playing field? Because it seems to me that it very much is. And it's interesting because when I was, on the other side of things as a journalist, at Global, I found it so, revolutionary almost, that within, 10 years of my adult life, all of a sudden we were hearing from so many people who previously we would never have had access to. Like my producer would have never been able to find to get on air to speak to. And I just think it's quite something.
And first to go back to something Celina said, and I don't want to sugarcoat what it looks like to be elected or to run for election or to be involved in politics. If you are outspoken and if you achieve something, as I think that, I had the honor and privilege of being able to do, you're going to pay for it, especially as a woman. If you're a racialized woman, you'll pay more for it. If you're a queer woman, you'll pay more for it. It costs. It's not fun. They will not make it easy. And by they, I mean not only your opposition, the other political parties, but also your own political party. You can expect that. That's to be expected. And it's not true only of politics, it's true of life, right? For those who are outspoken, but it's particularly true of politics. To the social media, there's an incredible example that I've just lived through. I still consider myself a social justice activist. So I found myself amplifying the voices of teachers and education workers recently who were saying, our schools are not safe. And, I would be getting these DMs all day long from teachers talking about these horrific situations in their schools. So I would amplify those voices. And we did this over and over and over again. And then, of course, there were medical voices as well. But what was most moving were the teachers and the education workers and the parents and the kids on the front line saying, guess what? There's no magical boundary for COVID from inside schools to outside schools. They're dangerous spaces. They're congregate settings and they're dangerous. And finally, you saw this flip of the government. Yeah. I know, and Celina knows this, people in politics know that politicians pay attention to social media. They have to. It's a de facto poll, if you think about it that way. If you've got, tens of thousands of people saying, what you're doing, isn't the right path, you're going to start to listen to that, because that means voters, and ultimately that means your job. So we saw the government do a complete 180 on that. The Minister of Education one day was saying schools are safe, and next day he's closing schools. So social media is phenomenally powerful. It's phenomenally powerful. I witnessed this just this last week, doing that by just amplifying voices. And so we got a win, such as it is, not really a win. We all want our schools to be open and safe, but it wasn't the case. But there's a classic example, and there are many, many of those. So yes, you can still be incredibly politically effective from the outside looking in.
I think I mentioned this off the top, but if these were normal times, I can say with almost 100% certainty that I feel like I would have cajoled both of you into drinks afterwards, after this discussion, but we're clearly not in those times. Yeah. We're clearly not in those times. And, in Ontario in particular, Cheri, you just touched on it, but we're in a pretty scary place. Our entire hospital system is under so much strain. We're facing potential collapse. And here we are, we're living through this period of worldwide grief. And it seems to me that at the start of the pandemic, we were having all these great conversations that I don't think we had had in a long time about how our old way of life it wasn't working, that we needed change. But I'm not so sure that we're having those talks to the same degree or at the same level anymore. So my question to both of you is, how do we channel people's collective grief right now, right? Because we're in a pandemic, people have gone through so much, and they're angry, but how do you channel that grief and that anger at this moment into impactful change when, quite honestly, so many of us are just exhausted from making our day-to-day lives work?
Well, maybe I'll jump in. I mean, there's some classic instances in Ontario, long-term care. I mean, we knew long-term care was a problem area way before COVID hit. When COVID hit, it became a deadly problem, and this is true and it's lived out in all of our systems, where we've been underfunding, public education. We've been underfunding healthcare. We've been chronically underfunding these public services that we rely on for so long. And then a pandemic hits, and then you see, the reality, and it's life and death, and it's death. So it's pretty clear cut. Now, what will come of this? I mean, again, the pressure is phenomenal, I believe, from all sorts of quarters on our government to do things differently. The critical thing, I think, for activists, and we are all activists, is to remind people, when the numbers start coming down, which we hope, of course, they will, when people are all inoculated, which we hope they will be eventually, reminding people of what didn't work. I mean, right today we have a premier who's saying, we just need more doses, and yet they've got 1.2 million sitting in fridges. It's a delivery problem, right? And it's their delivery problem. So again, just using the facts, getting the facts out, constantly just hammering away at it, so that there's a whole swath of people, people who've lost loved ones, people in education systems. These are huge communities who aren't going to forget easily. I mean, when you lose someone, and when you get really, really ill yourself, you don't forget easily. So we activists have to channel that and remind people of how bad it was, and how different it could be by looking at other jurisdictions who did it better. There's lots of good examples of that. So I think that's our job. And honestly, I think we're up for it. I'm positive.
So I'm not going to add anything much to what Cheri said, because I think she handled the pandemic portion of our tired. Yep. So, I'm at Queen's, I'm a senior EDI advisor, and I listen to some of our faculty of medicine talk about how their surgeries. So, we have our hospitals reaching capacity. That with COVID patients, that means a whole bunch of other surgeries are now being bumped, elective or otherwise, are being reshuffled, bumped, rescheduled, etc. So there are challenges that are going to be long-term, and the impact on the system is going to cost a lot. The interesting thing that Cheri said, though, was that, inoculations are coming. We're going to get vaccinated. The added dimension of this for people with intersecting identities, especially around race, is that you can't vaccinate against racism.
Yeah.
And
the social determinants of health aren't going to go away simply
right.
because, yeah.
True.
Right. So when you think about this week and the sadness that this week brings, combined with the fact that you look at each of the hotspots and those postal codes look like me.
Mhm.
And they're dying. They're dying. Is vaccination going to cure that? This is beyond just a inoculation exercise. This is an opportunity for our elected officials, our leadership beyond politics at this point, or just leaders in general, to say that we are going to show our mettle as a country at this moment. We see what is happening to people with intersecting identities. We saw what happened before when it came to the LGBTQ2 plus community, what happened to Black communities. We're seeing now a convergence of negative outcomes for women of color with multiple intersecting identities. Let us figure out a strategy around, and I'm going to pay very close attention to the budget that comes out in the next couple of weeks to see where investments are made around housing infrastructure, around mental health capacity building in these communities, around issues that we know are totally determined by the social determinants of health, as you said, Supriya. That is what I want to see. Inoculation is easy. Stop being so basic. Like, honestly, lead, for heaven's sakes. Somebody. Just bloody lead.
I mean, I couldn't agree more, Celina. And the social determinants of health, one of the reasons that we're in the situation we're in right now is, what I would characterize as neoliberalism, which has started, back in the day with Thatcher and Reagan, and this idea that you can simply cut taxes on the wealthy, keep doing that, and nobody's going to suffer. I mean, I grew up in the city and I was on, what they call student welfare. And on student welfare, I rented a basement apartment. I could put myself through school and I could eat. And there were conservative governments, provincially, federally, and municipally. So it wasn't even a partisan issue. The difference was taxation. The difference was wealthy people paid appropriate taxes. We have pandemic profiteers now who are making a fortune while others suffer, and they are not paying their fair share. And we're seeing results of that in all of our public systems and in our housing and in racism. This has, who's profiting from racism? Who's profiting from, the horrors that are being Indigenous in this country? Who's profiting from queers dying, as we saw them do in the village with the serial killer? Who profits from this? That's the question to ask. And I think there's a very simple answer. The very wealthy are profiting. The poor are getting much poorer. They're much poorer than I remember growing up in this town being, and the middle class is emptying out. That's the reality of our country and of our province and of our city. And that's about money. So let's look at that and see, especially where budgets are concerned, who's going to pay for it? Who's going to, you, me, or them, right?
Yeah, and I think a good point also with the budget is to make sure that stuff isn't coming in like 2075, right? Because you want to make sure that money, yeah.
Or you put, like the 2018 budget, $9 million for mental health in Black communities over 5 years. That is insulting. It's actually quite embarrassing. But I'll let you go on to your next question.
Well, yeah, I mean, it kind of flows nicely with what both of you have touched on, because I wanted to ask you a little bit about like how you think folks can be better allies or more effective allies on the ground. so you're not taking up too much space, or you're not sucking out too much oxygen of the room from the movement of the people whose lives are directly impacted. And I would just say for myself, when I am looking at my own community and even my own extended family, in a lot of cases, one thing that I decided from a younger age was that I was going to call out my own circle's bullshit when it came to anti-Black racism. And it's something that I think a lot of brown, South Asians are tend to be, if they're not actively participating in it, can be at least complicit by staying silent, right? And so that was something that I had to do, and I know a lot of other folks have done it. But how do you, what advice, I guess, can you give for others? Whether it's non-Black folk who want to help in the fight against anti-Black racism, or whether it's straight people who want to help stand up for the LGBT community, particularly the trans community that is constantly under attack and have their very lives and their very existence questioned. Because I know there are good people that do want to help, and they may just go about it in an awkward way, or they're not sure where to start or how to do it. What advice would you have for them?
So I'll start here. Number one, pick a lane. Okay.
Yeah.
Pick a lane. So I had a conversation with someone today that says, I'm not really into defund the police. I support Black Lives Matter, but I don't want to, defund the police. Then don't. There's so many other issues. Like, don't use that as an excuse for not doing something. You can't act because you don't want to defund the police. Education, healthcare, access to daycare, repeal mandatory. Pick one, because there are plenty. So pick a lane, whatever you're passionate about, and do it. Number two, don't reinvent the wheel. We've been doing this, and I shouldn't say we, but there are people much better than me that have been doing this work for a very long time. People all of a sudden in 2020 were woke. Yeah. Well, when you wake up, what do? You make the bed, you put on some eggs, you put on a pot of coffee, you get some toast done, you put on some bacon, you get some meals prepped. We've been awake for a long time. We didn't just wake up in 2020. So we have breakfast made, lunch made, dinner made, and we have some drinks on the table. Don't come into our organizations and say, well, I want a latte. No, I'm being quite serious, because everybody wants to feel they want to do something different. No, I done told you I had coffee put on. So either you're going to volunteer and make more coffee, donate and buy some more coffee, or just get your butt in there and make the coffee yourself. So you could donate to organizations who are doing great work. You could volunteer, or you could lend your resources. The next thing, number three, show up. Yeah. Act. How to be anti-racist means that you act, you do something. How to be anti-sexist, how to be anti-homophobic, how to be anti-discriminatory. You act, you do something. And then finally, at the most basic, is to at least have some empathy. We talk about cancel culture, and everybody's like, oh my God, cancel culture is so bad. Let me tell you something. Flash here. Spoiler alert. The culture of Black and Indigenous people in this country has been canceled forever. Yeah. Let's be clear what residential schools did. So when we talk about cancel culture, is because our histories are not recorded. So at least have the empathy in this moment, post 2020, to actually be a part of, or act, feel what we feel. So that 20, 30 years from now, we're not reading about this moment and seeing the erasure of our culture yet again. So it's pick a lane, don't reinvent the wheel, show up, and have some empathy. Seems pretty easy.
It's straightforward.
I would add, amen to it all. I would also add, follow the activists. If you want to be a good ally, don't kind of steep in your own privilege, and make it a self-help project. Follow the activists. When the activists are out there on the street demanding something, support that. go for it. And the other thing I would say, if you're an activist, is there's no harm in being the squeaky wheel with your political representatives either. We all know who those are. They're the ones at the mic at the all candidates meetings. They're the one that bother your constituency staff. We know who they are, and they force you to listen. And there have been phenomenal activists out there who do just that. They do both, right? And we can be those activists, so that's a start for sure. But we can also speak to those in political power and hold their feet to the fire, which we need to do, and get to know them. Be that squeaky wheel, be that one that demands, you know, all politicians know who these people are. We all wince when they come to the mic, right? So those are the people, be that person. And it's amazing what they can achieve. I mean, you know, shout outs. I mean, a trans activist, Susan Gappa, so I'll name her. But I mean, she was on ODSP when she started, you know, 12, 14, 15 years back, was going around Queen's Park and meeting with anybody who would give her the time of day. Trans people are still being killed in this country to this day. There's a demonstration just in Vancouver that, you know, really will result in the deaths of teenagers, saying that, you know, kids shouldn't start transitioning, et cetera, shouldn't get the medical help that they need. So it's very, very dangerous to be trans in this country, and it's particularly dangerous to be Black and trans, or Indigenous and two-spirited, and particularly very dangerous to be involved in sex trade, as sex workers as well. So, I mean, here we have a group of people, and she took it upon herself to come and visit everybody, conservatives, liberals, NDPers, everybody that was there at the time, and talk about the issue when nobody wanted to give her the time of day. So be that person. Doesn't take a lot of money, just takes time and effort, and you can change a great deal. So go for it. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing, Supriya, about the
Always.
wheel? I want to be very clear, and this is like, I'm saying this directly to the squeaky wheel. When you hold your government to account, you're not being a squeaky wheel. You are doing the job of your democracy. Yeah. And the democracy is the power of the people to hold those that they have elected to be their voice to account. We are not talking about an indictment of our leaders. We are not talking about, just getting at them because we have nothing better to do. They are leaders of a G7 country. Like, can we just wrap our heads around this for a moment? If we are not going to push them and hold them to our account, then what are we here for? To just let them do what they want? To let them do what is politically expedient? We, as the squeaky wheel, are doing our job. So don't ever feel, a ways about that. That is what we are supposed to be doing. That is what more of us should be doing. That is what our allies or co-conspirators should be joining forces with us to do, because this work is hard. It is draining. It takes from us. It robs us from our capacity to live. And we do it anyway. So show up. Yeah. Be there for us. We're willing to put our neck on the line. So what? You could just be comfortable? Just show up.
Yeah.
And give us something.
And that's a great point, Cheri. I was just going to ask both of you, just as a quick follow-up. I mean, how comfortable should people get with being uncomfortable? Because I feel like that has so much to do with it, right? It's like, you're going to be uncomfortable. That's okay. It's okay to feel this feeling.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's life and death. I mean, the pandemic has shown us that, right? These policies are life and death. They always were. This is pretty graphic. This is pretty in your face. But another issue that's life and death is, of course, the climate crisis, right? So that's life and death too. And that's for our grandchildren. And so, are we just going to be lemmings? Are we just going to follow along to get along? Are we just going to say business as usual? It's impossible. I mean, this is suicidal behavior. Right? This is suicidal behavior. So the question really is, are you going to be suicidal? You're going to fight tooth and nail to stay alive and to have a life for your children and your grandchildren and their grandchildren. Because it is a fight now. It's a fight for all of us. We got to show up. There's no time. I remember back in my business days when I was making way more money than I made since. And I think it was the first, war in Iraq. And I remember thinking, and I'm sure, Celina, you've had these days where it's like, oh, okay, I got to do something. I got to get busy again in the political world. I can't just, go to work and run my business and go home anymore. Like, I've got to do something now because bombs are falling and we are contributing to it, right? So, I mean, it's that way for all of us now, always has been. But, you have these moments of clarity. Well, hopefully COVID is a moment of clarity. Government policies kill people. It's that simple. They kill people. Are we going to let them keep on killing us, or are we going to stop it?
To that question about discomfort, people want to be uncomfortable about talking about a situation. Imagine living through it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, this is, we're talking about racial inequality. We're talking about a pandemic that is shining a glaring light on that. But we didn't need a pandemic to show that the poorest and most vulnerable were people with intersecting identities. Cheri talked about climate change is impacting the poorest and most vulnerable right here in this country. We have a global refugee crisis where 70+ million people do not have a state, in which means they don't have rights. And if we bring it right close to home, 1 in 5 women who are murdered in this country are Indigenous. So if you don't want to be uncomfortable having this conversation,
get out.
You have a lot of freaking privilege.
Yeah.
Because people who are uncomfortable in the current actions are ending up dead. That is just the plain simple facts. So if you don't want to have these uncomfortable conversations, check your privilege. That's it.
Yep.
Check it. No, once you check it, take several seats.
Yep. Yes, ma'am.
Cheri, I want to ask you a question in particular, because it seems like a forever ago, but you once told me in an interview that the NDP served as the conscience of Parliament. And I just wanted to get your take, because, we're in election speculation mode or season, but do you still think the NDP sort of still plays that role? And is that enough for the NDP to be able to aspire to?
I don't think it does it enough. I'll just be upfront about that. I think that's what they should be doing. And I think as the so-called Labour Party of Canada, representative of, say, unionized workers, let's say, they should be doing it way more. I think they should be upfront and outspoken socialist. I think they've had, it's kind of an axiom, the Liberals run to the left and then govern to the right.
Yeah.
Well, the NDP has for a long time, harbored this dream of supplanting the Liberal Party in some way. That's never going to happen. Give it up. You're not going to be Liberals, so why run as Liberals and why govern as Liberals? Be what you were established to be, which was a socialist party standing for values that are anti-capitalist. And guess what? Bernie did it. Guess what? You can use the word. There's a whole new generation that really hungers for that kind of politics, not just young. I mean, I'm not young and I hunger for it, but I mean, things like, free post-secondary education, things like pharmacare, things like universal paid childcare. These are policies we should have had a long time ago, that countries all over Europe have, and we don't have them because we haven't asked for them and we haven't worked for them and we haven't made them core issues to fight around. So, let's stop with, these little reforms around the edges. There's not time for that. There's not time for that. We can't cozy up to big oil as we've done in some NDP governments. We can't go against, Indigenous as some NDP governments have done. We can't, turn our backs on, auto insurance, public auto insurance, as some NDP governments have done. And we've got to be upfront socialists. And I'm not alone in the party on that. So that's why I say, I still keep a foot in the party, absolutely, and support those in the party that are activists. But so conscience, we could do a way better job at being a conscience, way better.
And to be honest, there are some people, as Cheri said, that are doing it. Matthew Green is totally doing it. Jill Andrews, totally doing it.
Yeah.
Leah, totally doing it. There's people that are doing it that are holding, and it's not just the consciousness, because we're beyond that now. It is actually putting the pressure on and holding the governments of the day to account.
Celina, I've got a question for you now. We've talked a bit about this, but how do you get more people into politics that, you know, look like you, that are Black, without it turning into a box checking activity of being like, oh, you have melanin? Oh, you got boobs too? Okay, yeah, go stand over here. Like, and then once you get more people into politics, how do we make that space better for them? Because it's one thing to get people in, but it's another thing to keep them there. And I don't know if we're keeping them there.
Right. And that has to do with the culture of the organization. So one, get people in there and allow them to be their 100% authentic selves. When we think about the fact that, you know, when you Google professional hair versus unprofessional hair, you see white versus Black women. We still have gendered washrooms. We have a province in this country that has banned wearing religious garb. Like, this kind of foolishness is so 2019, 2018. Like, honestly, post 2020, get your head out of
your butt,
the rear side of your body, and figure yourselves out. Okay. So allow people to show up as their 100% ourselves. And this has to do with leadership, because the tone is always set from the top. Let me be clear, always set from the top. But if you have all of this diversity sprinkled into a very toxic environment, what will happen is that environment will kill it, or people will leave. Because microaggressions, according to the American Psychological Association, causes trauma. People will leave rather than die in your space. Believe me, I have been there. So if you have an organization, the leadership of your organization really wants that diversity, that equity, and not just diversity, please, let's stop setting such a low bar around diversity.
Hashtag diversity.
Not our strength. It's our ability to be inclusive and then equitable. That is our strength. So if the leadership wants the organization, whether it's political or otherwise, to actually have a return on investment when it comes to equity, they will shift the culture of the organization such that it allows for the fostering of that inclusion. And just I'm going to end on this. McKinsey did a report in 2019 that stated that the cost of racial inequity in the United States is $1 to $1.5 trillion, which is 6% of their GDP. Wow. When McKinsey did that a few years ago in 2015, when they looked at giving women the tools to reach their full potential, it will add 12 to $28 trillion to the global GDP. We are talking about trillions of dollars that leadership leaves off the table because they do not want equity. Why? Because they're so busy trying to hold their tiny little fists around their power, their privilege, and their profit, that if they actually realize, if they open their hands just a little bit more and allow equity in, they will be able to access some of those trillions. And it's not about cutting into that slice of pie. It's about adding those people in to bake a bigger pie so everybody gets a slice and everybody could eat. And this is what we're talking about when we say add more people. It's not just about adding people. It's about shifting cultures of all organizations to be receptive to that diversity, to then create the inclusion that is necessary for equity.
I'm starting to get audience questions sort of trickling here, but I have to ask both of you, before we end this and get to some of the audience questions. It's just us girls. Are you going back into politics, either of you?
Never say never, right?
Never say. I'll say a big hell yeah.
Okay.
But I'm going to show up like Pokeroo. I'm just going to show up. I'm not going to tell anybody where I'm showing up. Do people know what Pokeroo is? Am I dating myself?
No. People know. I mean, I'm from Quebec, so I only know it because of
okay.
People know.
Never really laughed.
Y'all don't know. You're young.
Yeah.
So both of you never say never.
Yeah, for sure.
Never.
Okay, all right, it's interesting. Let me get one of the first questions from the audience. It's to go to either of you, jump in, whomever wants to grab this. But why is it that, in your opinions, it's taking so long to address disability?
This is a shameful. I mean, this is the shame of the nation. It's actually disgusting the way that we treat people with disabilities in this country. And again, the pandemic has shown that so clearly, right? I mean, CERB paid people more than people make on ODSP. We have a systemic problem here where we think it's okay to keep people with disabilities in chronic poverty, people who cannot work to make any sizable income. Those people, we are saying morally, this is an ethical choice we've made, you should forever live in chronic poverty. That's the message that our governments are giving to people with disabilities. So, and again, my own, welfare experience, the amount that we've asked them to live on has gone down and down and down relative to the incomes of everyone else. So it's become worse and worse over the years, not better and better. It's not progressing, it's getting worse and worse, to the point now where I hear from people who don't have enough to eat and they can't get out to food banks. It's a pandemic. So we have people starving at home. We have people living in tents. How bad does it have to get before we give a damn, right? So that's where we're at with people with disabilities. And any government official who says that it's not, it's like housing. Nobody wants to build housing. This is an ethical choice. It's not a financial choice. It's an ethical choice. And they say, we don't care whether people are living on the streets or not. And we don't care whether you're starving and have a disability. That is the answer of all of our governments right now. Pure and simple.
So I agree. And I think it takes so long to address disability in the same way that it has taken so long for us to get to equity. It is what is politically expedient for people to do, just as Cheri has demonstrated. But I'm going to talk, because I'm an equity advisor at Queen's, I'm going to talk from a DEI perspective. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has been a multi-billion-dollar industry that has not benefited anything more, to be quite honest, than white women. White women have climbed the ladder, are CEOs. When we look at DEI, when we look at sort of the metrics of it, we see sort of, women, not women of white women, being able to be CEOs or on board positions, and we see 50%, or because it's 2015 or things like that. The problem with that is that we forget a lot that diversity is not just about gender. When we think about what our federal government does now, looking at a gender-based analysis, as if people don't have intersecting identities. Why not look at it from an equity-based analysis? Why not analyze policy to see how it impacts people with multiple intersecting identities? That if we look at things from an equity-based analysis, then we are able to understand the disability lens. It's interesting. I read this book, Hood Feminism, and if you haven't read it, I think it's a fabulous book. Yeah. And I hate to bring up an American author, but I am, and I bring up some Canadian ones. But, when we talk about how feminism has left a lot of women behind, people who want food security, who want healthcare, who want access to daycare, who want access to the living well, is the same way that equity left behind, or DEI have left behind, people with disabilities, people with intersecting identities. And so it is incumbent upon people like me, who works in this space, to ensure that we are not just talking about equity from a perspective of race or gender. We have to talk about it from a perspective of sexuality, disability, religion, socioeconomic status. We have to be holistic about it. And to answer that question, I think that there's a responsibility beyond government to ensure that we are not leaving people behind.
there's another question that I need to get to, but I wanted to ask you something just really quickly with respect to UBI, a universal basic income, because that comes up a lot. And I hear a lot from disability activists and, economists that are actually crunching the numbers to suggest that a UBI, while in theory is good, a lot of the time you're just clawing back the existing supports. And often if you do have those intersecting, identities, and if you are on disability, you don't end up necessarily with more, you actually end up with less. And I know it's
same for
like
seniors. It's the same
and for
thing
seniors,
Yeah.
So I was wondering what your take was on that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to make sure it has to be, if it's going to be done, it has to be done well. It can't just be a bonus for bad employers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of, it has to be, you can't force people to live on less, and you can't make it be, a backstop for bad employers, of which there are many, by the way. And it does not supplant basic workers' rights like a livable wage. A livable wage is a critical struggle, and we don't have anywhere near a livable wage right now. So if we had a livable wage, I remember when I went to Sweden, and it's no utopia, but let's just use this example. When I went to Sweden on a parliamentary trip, the workers at McDonald's were unionized. And first of all, that's a shocker, right? They were all unionized. And second of all, they made a livable wage. Like, we were fighting back then. My first bill was a $10 minimum wage bill. They were at that time, and it was $8 in Ontario. They were making like $14 an hour working at McDonald's in Sweden, approximately, give or take. So, again, this can happen. It can be done. So increased unionization is equally important, if not more important than UBI. A livable wage, and if you're going to bring in UBI, then do it so that it's not just a gift to bad employers.
There's a question here from the audience that I think is a really good one. What are your thoughts on how activists, especially ones from the marginalized communities that they're advocating for, what can they do to prevent burnout? Like, how do people actually recharge and refuel from work that is absolutely grueling and, effing exhausting?
So, I would say, you need to take your breaks.
Yeah.
This week in particular, I posted on Instagram today, especially to the Black community, to breathe. Take your time to cry, and then breathe again. Because if you just keep going to the expense of your mental health, your physical well-being, your spiritual connectiveness, you will not be able to do this work tomorrow. And if you ever doubted that we needed you to do the work tomorrow, let me tell you, we need you to do the work tomorrow. So you need to take the breaks that you need. And if I could talk about mental health for a moment, for the first time ever, I've been compliant with my medication this year, knock on wood. And I've done that since January, and it's been very difficult to do so because, a brain that is depressed and has issues doesn't want to do that. But I've been taking time to be compliant, to do my meditation, to acknowledge when I'm angry, like this week, and to just tune out of all social media. I have not been on Twitter in a while. I go on to because I have events, so I have to go on. Or my daughter, who's my executive coordinator, she goes on and retweets stuff for me and does stuff for me. But I just have to take a break and not be on it. So, don't get yourself only you could burn you out. When you're getting to burnout, take the time that you need, because we need to be ready to get back in again soon, if not tomorrow.
Yeah, I would echo all of that. I would say as well that that's why I'm wearing a collar and why I have another job now, because quite frankly, the activist life is fantastic. I still consider myself one. I work with activists. I love activists. We should all be activists. But you're beating your head against the wall, and sometimes the head goes and the wall stays the same. And sometimes it's pie tomorrow and never pie today. And it's really important to be spiritually sustained. It's really important to have a supportive community, a community that tries to live out what we're all fighting for. And of course, it's always going to be imperfect because it's now and we're imperfect beings, but to have that base community of support that you are part of, right? That's I think it's at their very best. That's what faith communities can provide, but not only faith communities, but I mean, you need that support, right? And otherwise you lose your way. I mean, you just lose your way, even as an activist, I would argue. So it's not, I hate the term like self-care, it's so overused, but you need a community. You need to be modeling what you're fighting for as much as you can right now, and to have the supports you're fighting for as much as you can right now. And you can find that if you look for it. It's there.
Yeah, I think, you both touched on mental health aspects, and it just, it occurs to me that it's health. It's just health. Like if you're not mentally well in a good space, like that affects it physically affects you. And I just feel like that, people tend to gloss over it. It's like, oh, I just need to power through. But it's like, no, you need to take time.
No, and I think I learned that during this pandemic where we were all forced to just stop.
Yeah.
And then look around and reevaluate. And honestly, it's probably the only reason that I've been compliant with my medication over this year is because I realized that if my health isn't well, and again, I always talk about the physical, mental, and spiritual sides of everything, we're just not going to make it through. This is a lot of work, and this is thankless work. When women started Black Lives Matter, they were called terrorists. Mm-hmm. They were demonized.
Oh, you should hear some of the things that my old talk radio colleagues used to say. Yeah.
Horrible, horrible thing. Now everybody's willing to say hashtag Black Lives Matter, but they forget. They forget what these women have gone through. They forget how they continue to work and do the work, even in the face of vitriol. And I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't say protect them at all costs, because they, we do the work and we don't get thanked. We get vilified. I felt the same thing in Parliament, get vilified for it, and then get thrown out, only to have 2 years later, the Prime Minister take a knee. I'm just going to have another drink.
Yeah, you go.
I clearly need one right now.
Yeah, I mean, there were times at Queen's Park where I would just be sick walking into the building. I mean, so I think both Celina and I are saying the same thing in the sense that be activists. It's going to cost you. It's not going to be easy, and it's at times going to be awful. And that's, I would argue, is why it can't be everything. Your life. You need this other part of your life where you actually kind of in some way, shape, or form get what you're fighting for, right? And what you're fighting for everyone, you get a little taste of that, enough taste of it to keep you going on your own. That's so critical for spiritual, mental, and even physical health, quite frankly. So I would absolutely agree. We're saying, but I mean, there's joy even in the midst, of all of this. And occasionally the win, I have to say, when, banning conversion therapy happened, when trans rights finally happened, when parent equality finally happened, when the $10 minimum wage happened, and now we're fighting for a living wage, when I did the first legalized same-sex marriage happened, these are highs that are worth it. And as an activist, you will have those highs and you will also have lows. But what a life, right? It's not. It's not boring.
You know, I would just add, sorry, I see Becca coming.
No, keep going.
I
We
would just
are
add
awesome.
that sometimes you're not going to get the highs. And I'm talking to the people who are watching, who are the advocates, who are the squeaky wheels. Sometimes you're not going to get the highs. And I don't know if I've ever gotten the highs. But my high is that I love the people that I serve, whether I'm in parliament or not. I love my community. I don't advocate for the repeal of mandatory minimums or the expungements of cannabis records because I plan on going to jail. I advocate because I know that it impacts my community. It tears Black and Indigenous communities apart. It hurts people. It hurts families. It hurts our community, and therefore it hurts our country. And I love these people. I've never met them. I don't know who they are, but I love them. And so if you could ground your advocacy in your values and your principles, and it goes back to what I started with when I talked about the kid in me who does this, who understands those hurts and pains and how it feels like when you're able to ground what your advocacy is in your values and principles and anchor them by something that is important to you, either pain or love, then the highs are a bonus, but the work will keep going.
And as you were saying, Celina, one of my favorite theologians, Cornel West, always says, justice is what love looks like in public. That's what love. Yeah.
It's a great place to bring you in, Becky.
Yeah. Well, first off, I would like to say thank you, Celina and Cheri and Supriya, because this has been, I'm so inspired by all three of you, by this conversation, by the power of this conversation, and by the insights that you've all shared into things that I know are kind of behind the wall for a lot of people. I didn't tell you this before, but I was actually a media analyst at Queen's Park for 5 or 4 years. And so I was I was back transcribing the my mic's really big. Here.
Now you're on mute.
There. Is this
there
better?
You go. Yeah, way better.
So I was a media analyst at Queen's Park for 4 years, which meant that I was one of the people behind the scenes transcribing all of then Premier Wynn's speeches, the ones that you hear, like the interviews that you hear in public, but also like the before and after parts that was only interesting to the political staff. And I was transcribing CBC's Power and Politics, and I was transcribing all of the ministerial interviews. And so you get a pretty interesting look when you are that immersed in all of the conversations that are happening and the issues management that are happening behind the scenes, but also like the way that people in power listen to what people are saying. Like I composed the social media reports after budget day, staying with my team until 1 a.m. at Queen's Park to make sure that all of the political staffers knew exactly who was saying what about every single one of the issues. And then those reports would go to all of the staffers. So like people do listen. And as a noted squeaky wheel whose emails are now responded to by my member of parliament in multiple paragraphs with hyperlinks because I have been such a squeaky wheel, it is effective and you should do it.
I'm going to keep tweeting then. I thought I was going to stop, but now I'm going to keep going.
Celina,
I had a break for a moment, but thank you, Rebecca, for bringing me back.
The other thing too, as a fellow med taker, like rest is revolutionary. Everyone should follow this Instagram account, the NAP Ministry. It's run by a racialized woman, and it tells you every day, like rest is revolutionary. You taking a rest is part of the revolution. You not having to work yourself to death in order to support all of this, like, so. There,
you
I'm
swore before I did. Oh my
God!
I was
so good. I get the bingo card today.
Okay.
Oh, this is so awesome! You made my day, man.
Good. You have made all of our day. So we are going to wrap this up so that we can chatter with all of you post-panel in our secret green room studio. But again, I just want to say thank you, all three of you, because you have all been so invigorating in this conversation. Everyone was riveted in the comments. Everyone's just kind of like too busy listening to ask questions. So thank you all. I'm so impressed by all of you again. Good news for everyone tuning in from home. There are books that you can buy to support our authors and our official bookseller, Another Story Bookshop. Can You Hear Me Now by Celina, Caesar-Chavannes, and The Queer Evangelist by Reverend Cheri DiNovo. So there's a link to that in our right here and also in the chat. You can also find it in the description section, I believe, of this video. As I mentioned earlier, you can check out more of our year-round virtual programming at the Word on the Street Toronto right here on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel. Check out our Book of the Month book talk this month with Ill Virus author Lillian Nekakov and the editor Stuart Ross. And next month, we're going to be back with a bunch of Scarborough authors that we absolutely adore, including Teo Mutanji, Natasha Ramatar, who's the only one that I haven't met yet, and Adrienne de Leon, all of whom have been featured at WOTS before, I believe. And Teo Mutanji has just come out with the Trillium Award for her latest book. So that's going to be a very interesting one. So come back next month. And I see the sun has set. So Ramadan Mubarak to everyone celebrating and breaking their fast right now. If you'd like to support The Word on the Street Toronto, visit us at toronto.thewordonthestreet.ca. And we hope that you will continue to enjoy our content and continue to tune in as we gear up for our next virtual festival, WOTS 2021. Take care, everyone.